He said I was dragging it out, like delay was all I had left, like time itself belonged to him because he wore better suits, spoke louder in conference rooms, and knew how to smile at people who billed by the hour. He said it in the hallway outside mediation, one hand in his pocket, voice low enough to sound civilized, cruel enough to leave a bruise. "You're going to regret fighting me," he said. And I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because by then I already knew something he didn't. I knew there was a clause buried in the very agreement he'd been using to corner me. A clause his own arrogance had carried past my eyes twice. A clause that turned his clean little asset grab into fraud the second he took one more step. I didn't tell him about it. I let him keep talking. I let him keep spending. I let him keep lying in rooms where every minute cost money, because some people only understand consequences when they arrive wearing a stamp, a court seal, and a number they can't explain away. My name is Julia Mercer, and the first time I realized my husband was trying to erase me on paper, I was standing in our kitchen in Bellevue, Washington, with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand and an email from our bank open on my phone. Subject line, change in authorized access. That was it. No drama in the wording, no warning siren, just a quiet, sterile sentence from an institution that had held our mortgage for 11 years. I clicked it expecting a routine update, maybe a policy notice, maybe one of those messages nobody reads. Instead, I saw that my online permissions for the joint operating account tied to Mercer Design Holdings had been modified at 6:12 a.m. Modified. Not removed. Not revoked. Modified. The kind of word that hides a knife in a blazer pocket. Mercer Design Holdings was the LLC that owned the commercial building where Ethan ran his architecture firm. A renovated brick property in downtown Seattle. We had purchased 7 years earlier with money from the sale of my late mother's rental duplex, and a loan I had personally guaranteed when Ethan's credit took a hit during one of his expansion phases. The building had become his favorite proof that he was the serious one in the marriage. He loved saying my name had never been on the letterhead, as if paper could rewrite contribution. What he hated, what he always hated, was that my name was on the LLC formation documents, on the guarantee, and on the side agreement we signed after the refinance. That side agreement was the clause. At the time, he had called it cleanup language. I had called it caution. Our attorney back then, an older woman named Marlene Chow, who looked like she had been born unimpressed, had insisted we add it after Ethan tried to push through a refinancing structure that would allow him to transfer membership interests without notice if he claimed it was for business continuity. Marlene shut that down in under 30 seconds. If she guarantees debt, she gets veto rights on transfer and sale events, she'd said. And if either member conceals a third-party assignment, encumbrance, or beneficial transfer, the non-breaching member has an immediate right to force liquidation or assume majority control at book value with fees. Ethan had smiled that charming smile he used whenever he planned to ignore a woman later. "Of course," he said. I remembered the way he signed it, fast, distracted, already looking at his phone. I remembered because Marlene had looked at me over the file and said, "Keep a copy outside the house." I did. 3 copies, actually. One in my desk at the nonprofit where I worked as development director. One in a bank box. One scanned into a cloud folder Ethan never knew existed because he thought secrecy belonged exclusively to him. So when I saw that bank email in my kitchen, when I saw changes made to the operating account tied to the property, I didn't panic first. I listened. That's a strange thing to say, but it's true. Marriage to a man like Ethan teaches you that information arrives with a sound before it arrives with meaning. A slight shift in how he closed drawers, a new softness in his tone when he wanted to control the next room. The extra half second before he answered a direct question. That morning the house sounded wrong. Too quiet upstairs. Too much movement in the garage an hour earlier. And when Ethan came into the kitchen wearing one of his gray tailored coats and not looking at me, really not looking at me, I knew before he spoke that some version of paperwork had already begun. "You're up early," I said. He reached for the espresso machine like he still belonged to the ordinary rhythm of our life. "Big day." "What kind of big day?" "The kind you don't need to worry about." There it was, the sentence men use when they think exclusion is efficiency. I set my mug down. "I got a bank email." He didn't flinch. That almost impressed me. "Probably compliance updates," he said. "It says authorized access changed on the Mercer account." He finally looked at me then. Calm, mildly annoyed, like I was a receptionist who had stepped past her role. "I'm restructuring signatory permissions because of the separation." We had not filed for separation. We had not signed anything. We had spent 3 weeks sleeping in different rooms after I found text messages between him and a woman named Sloan Barrett, a real estate broker with white teeth, expensive hair, and an Instagram full of captions about discipline and abundance. Ethan had insisted it was emotionally complicated, but not physical, which is the kind of sentence only liars think sounds mature. "Separation?" I asked. He sipped espresso. "You and I both know where this is going." That doesn't answer the question. He leaned back against the counter and gave me the smile, the one investors liked, the one interns mistook for warmth. "The building has to be protected from domestic instability." Domestic instability, meaning me, meaning the woman who had signed when the lender wanted backup security, meaning the woman whose inheritance became his down payment story. I said nothing. He mistook that for weakness too. "Julia, don't make this uglier than it needs to be." And there it was, again. That assumption, that ugliness enters a room with the woman who notices the paperwork, never the man who changes it before breakfast. I went to work that day with my jaw tight and my spine so straight it hurt. My office sat on the 3rd floor of an arts education nonprofit in Pioneer Square. We served public schools, community centers, and after-school programs that always needed more than donors wanted to give. I was good at my job because I understood 2 things. Most people in fundraising don't. People lie about values all the time, and paper tells the truth if you ask hard enough. At 9:40 a.m., I called the bank relationship manager assigned to the LLC accounts. She couldn't disclose much, not with the way authority had been shifted, but she disclosed enough by becoming careful too quickly. There appears to have been a request related to administrative streamlining, she said. Related to what? A reclassification of access consistent with updated management authority. Management authority, not ownership, not guarantee. I asked whether any loan instruments or collateral positions had been modified. Long pause. Keyboard clicks, a breath. I can't discuss that without current authorization. Was a document submitted this morning? Another pause. I'd recommend you review your governing agreements immediately. That was all she could safely say. That was all I needed. I took an early lunch and sat in my car in a parking garage, rain ticking softly against the windshield, while I opened the cloud folder Marlene had told me never to trust to memory alone. There it was. Side letter. Addendum to Mercer Design Holdings Operating Agreement. 7 pages. Boring font. Lethal language. Section 4, B. In the event either member directly or indirectly pledges, assigns, transfers, encumbers, or enters into any agreement affecting beneficial control of company assets or membership interests without written notice to and consent of the other member, the non-breaching member shall have the immediate and unilateral option to elect one of the following remedies. 1. Compel sale of the affected asset and reimbursement from proceeds. Or 2. Assume controlling interest at book value, with all professional fees, costs, and damages borne by the breaching member. There were other teeth in it too. Fee shifting, mandatory disclosure, cross-default language tied to personal guarantees, a representation that neither member would make a material omission to any lender or title company in connection with an encumbrance. Material omission? Not fraud, exactly, but close enough to make lenders nervous, judges patient, and title companies allergic. I read it twice, then a third time. The more I read, the colder I got. Because Ethan hadn't just moved money around. He had either already encumbered the building or was about to. And if he had done that without written notice to me, the clause gave me options he would never expect me to use. I could have called him then. I could have gone straight to his office. I could have told him I knew. Instead, I called Marlene. She retired 2 years earlier, but retired lawyers like Marlene don't actually retire. They become more dangerous because they no longer need anything from anyone. She answered on the second ring. Julia, it wasn't a question. I think Ethan moved against the building this morning. How stupid. That's what I'm trying to determine. Good. Stupidity comes in billable levels. I laughed once. Tiny, involuntary. Relief tastes strange when it first arrives. I gave her the bank language, the access change, the separation wording, the old clause. She let me finish, then said, "Don't confront him yet." I wasn't planning to. Excellent. Men like your husband ruin themselves fastest when they think they're ahead. You remember him fondly. I remember him predictably. By 4 that afternoon, Marlene had connected me with a litigator named Aaron Feld, younger than I expected, sharp without theatrics, the kind of attorney who listened like he was sorting wires in his head. I met him in a conference room that smelled like toner and winter coats. He read the clause, looked at the loan guarantee, looked at the formation documents, and asked a question nobody else had asked me since the messages with Sloan came out. What does he think you don't know? I thought about that, not what he had done, what he thought I was capable of understanding. He thinks I know he's cheating, I said. He doesn't think I know finance. He doesn't think I remember documents he signed in front of women he underestimated. Aaron nodded once. That helps. How? Because overconfidence is procedural fertilizer. He filed a quiet records request that afternoon through channels available to members and guarantors. Nothing aggressive yet. Nothing Ethan would immediately detect. He also sent a preservation letter to the bank and a notice request to the title company most likely involved in any commercial refinance Ethan would pursue, based on the property's loan history. That last part mattered, because title companies become very careful when guarantor consent may be missing. By dinner, Ethan texted me from downtown, late night. "Don't wait up." I stared at the screen, then typed back, "No problem." It was the first lie I told him in weeks. The next morning he came home smelling faintly of cedar cologne that wasn't his. He showered, changed, and left again before 7. On the bathroom counter he had forgotten a printed page folded in thirds. Not because he was careless, because people like Ethan stop noticing risk when the house still responds to them like a house. It wasn't the whole document, just a cover sheet and routing instruction from Barrett Commercial Realty, Sloan's firm, property strategy review, confidential, debt optimization options, debt optimization. I took a picture and put the page back exactly where it had been, crease to crease, angle to angle. At noon, Aaron called. "We got movement," he said. My pulse climbed. What kind? A notice of preliminary underwriting was opened for a secondary credit facility using the building as collateral. Secondary. Likely a bridge line or equity extraction play, not closed yet. Did he list himself as sole authority? A beat. He listed managing authority. Your existence is disclosed in fragments, just enough to look compliant if nobody reads carefully. That was Ethan all over. Never a clean lie when a muddy half-truth could travel farther. Aaron kept talking. The bigger problem for him is this. If he represented control sufficient to negotiate an encumbrance without giving you notice, he may already have triggered the clause even before closing. I sat back in my office chair and stared at the ceiling tiles. So he doesn't even have to succeed? Sometimes the attempt is enough. Depends on the paper trail. And if he's doing it to move cash before filing, then he's not just planning for divorce. He's planning for leverage. That night I watched Ethan from across our own dining room table while he talked about market conditions and temporary liquidity strategies to no one in particular, because men like him enjoy hearing themselves sound inevitable. I made roasted salmon. We ate like a couple auditioning for civility. Rain moved softly over the windows. Seattle in March, cold light, wet branches, a world pretending restraint. He dabbed his mouth with a napkin. I have mediation options for us. Do you? Yes. Clean ones, sensible ones, assuming you don't get emotional and complicate valuation. I looked at him. Really looked. 46. Controlled. Attractive in the way magazines like because it reads as authority. Every feature arranged by self-belief. He had been handsome when I married him. He was still handsome now. That had never been the problem. The problem was that he had spent 14 years treating every act of trust like unsecured credit. What valuation? I asked. Our life, Julia. I almost smiled. He thought our life could be placed in a spreadsheet and slid across a table after he had already moved assets out of reach. He thought efficiency was morality. He thought being first meant being right. And what does your clean option look like? I asked. He leaned back. You keep the house, assuming you can refinance within 90 days. I retain full business interest. We waive claims on each other's future earnings. Retirement is divided by counsel's worksheet. We move on. It sounded balanced for about 3 seconds. Then the math assembled itself. The house was worth less, more illiquid, and attached to memories he assumed would weaken me. The business interest included the commercial building, the appreciating asset, the leverage source, the thing bought partly with my inheritance and guaranteed partly by my credit. You're generous tonight, I said. I'm practical. No, I said softly. You're early. His eyes narrowed just enough to matter. What does that mean? I sipped water. It means people reveal their final offer too soon, when they think they've already secured the real money. There was a pause then. Tiny. Electric. He smiled. You've been talking to someone. Should I not? You'll waste a lot of money letting lawyers fill your head with strategies you don't understand. There it was, the oldest song. I stood, took my plate to the sink, and said only, maybe. By the end of that week, the escalation had begun. First came the mediator selection email from Ethan's attorney, a polished woman named Dana Voss, whose billing rate probably made junior associates sweat. She used words like efficient, streamlined, and market-based. Every sentence assumed Ethan's operating control should remain untouched for the good of the enterprise. I read it 3 times and could almost hear him dictating the emotional weather he wanted the process to have. Then came the draft financial disclosures. Incomplete in a way only expensive lawyers think they can get away with. Personal accounts listed. Retirement listed. The Bellevue house listed. But the Mercer Design Holdings asset sheet was summarized, not attached. No supporting schedule for contingent debt. No separate disclosure of current financing inquiries. No correspondence related to collateral review. Aaron sent back a response so calm it probably frightened people who knew how to read. Requesting full schedules, requesting underwriting communications, requesting any proposed pledge, transfer, or assignment affecting company assets or membership interests, requesting documentation of changes in bank authority made after the marital breakdown date. That same afternoon, Ethan called me from his car. Not texted. Called. "You're blowing this up," he said without hello. "I'm asking for documents. You're asking for nonsense designed to punish me. No. I'm asking for the paperwork tied to things that affect me. The business affects me. The house affects you." I laughed then. Couldn't help it. "You really believe geography determines equity?" "This isn't funny." "No," I said. "It's expensive." His voice sharpened. "You are not entitled to interfere with my firm because you're hurt." And there it was. Again, the translation. Any legal question from a wife becomes emotion. Any concealment from a husband becomes strategy. "I'm entitled to information tied to anything I guaranteed," I said. "You signed because you were my spouse." "I signed because the bank wanted a grown-up." He hung up on me. I sat there in my office staring at my phone, hand shaking just a little. Not from fear, but from the clean rush that comes when a person finally says the truest thing they've been swallowing for years. That weekend, Ethan moved into the guest house over the garage for space, though he came and went from the main house like he still owned the air. I let him. I had already begun moving important things quietly. Jewelry from my grandmother, old tax files, the hard drive containing property scans, my mother's handwritten letters. Not because I thought he'd steal them. Because once paperwork war starts, houses stop being homes and become evidence containers. On Monday, Aaron received the first real crack in Ethan's wall. A title officer, cautious and clearly irritated, sent back a formal response stating that no insurable transaction involving the building could close without clarification of member consent, due to an internal note referencing a side agreement affecting beneficial control. That note existed because 7 years earlier, Marlene had insisted the title file reference be preserved when the refinance recorded. Not the full clause. Just enough to tell any future reader there was a hidden wire in the wall. Ethan hadn't known that. Or if he had, he assumed nobody would trace it. Aaron forwarded me the email with one line. "He's driving faster than the road allows." For the first time, I felt something like hope settle into bone instead of just adrenaline. Then Ethan escalated harder. He filed first. Of course he did. Petition for dissolution in King County. Irretrievable breakdown. Request for temporary orders. Exclusive management authority over Mercer Design. Holdings pending final allocation. Proposed restraints against interference with business operations. I read the filing in Aaron's office, while the city outside blurred gray and silver behind rain. He wants a temporary order fast, Aaron said. Because if he can get the court used to him as sole operator before the finance issue surfaces fully, he frames you as disruption instead of counterpart. He's building the story before the facts are ready. Yes. I looked down at the page. Can he win that? Aaron leaned back. Not if we tell the better truth first. We filed our response within 48 hours. Not loud, not theatrical, precise. We attached the guarantee, the membership records, the addendum, the bank change notice, the title officer's concern. We requested reciprocal restraints, full financial disclosure, and immediate prohibition against further encumbrance, transfer, or pledge of the building without joint written consent or court order. We did not yet move on the clause remedy itself. Not fully. That was the part I didn't tell Ethan about. Aaron had asked me 3 times whether I wanted to send notice immediately invoking Section 4B. 3 times I said not yet. Why wait? He asked. Because I knew Ethan. Because as long as he thought this was a divorce fight, he would keep behaving like the smartest man in the room. The moment he understood, it was also a control event under the LLC agreement. The moment he understood, he might lose not just secrecy, but the building itself at book value. He would stop being arrogant and start being dangerous. So I said, let him keep talking. Aaron studied me for a second, then nodded. All right. The temporary orders hearing was set for 12 days later. 12 days is long enough for fear to become background radiation, long enough to wake at 3 a.m. and imagine every possible version of public humiliation, long enough to start doubting documents you have read with your own eyes because the man across from you has spent a marriage teaching you that his interpretation arrives more polished than your reality. Ethan used all 12. He began copying me on internal firm emails where junior staff addressed him as sole principal. He let a contractor send a payment question to our house, then wrote back in front of me, I no longer need secondary approval on holdbacks. He arrived at mediation prep with spreadsheets designed to make the building look cash poor and debt heavy, all burden, no upside, as if he were kindly volunteering to absorb a mess I was too untrained to understand. Sloan appeared twice during that stretch. The first time I saw her in person was outside a coffee place near the courthouse. Camel coat, expensive boots, phone in one hand, confidence in the other. She pretended not to notice me until Ethan touched her elbow. Then her whole face assembled into that sleek woman-to-wife expression. Sympathy lacquered over triumph. Julia, she said, like we were meeting at a fundraiser, I'm so sorry this is hard. I looked at her for a second and felt nothing surprising. No jealousy, no dramatic fury. Just the odd clarity that comes when another woman has mistaken a man's confidence for character. Hard for whom? I asked. Ethan cut in too fast. This isn't necessary. No, I said. Very little of this was. I walked away before either of them could find a tone they liked. The second time, Sloan mattered more. Aaron's team discovered that Barrett Commercial Realty had circulated a confidential off-market valuation package for the building to 2 private lenders and 1 debt fund. Not a sale listing. Not exactly. More like a flirtation with recapitalization. Enough to suggest Ethan wasn't just trying to pull out cash. He may have been positioning for a preferred equity structure. Something complicated enough to muddy ownership while claiming it was only an operational finance maneuver. That was when Aaron stopped calling Ethan reckless and started calling him greedy. Greedy people cross paperwork thresholds without noticing, he said. Is that good? It's useful. The hearing arrived on a Thursday morning. I wore navy, not because navy means strength in articles written for women trying not to look emotional in court, because navy was what I wore when I needed to feel like my body belonged entirely to me. Ethan arrived with Dana and a leather folio. He looked composed. He always did in public conflict. That was one of his gifts. He knew how to borrow legitimacy from posture. We sat on opposite sides of the courtroom. Temporary matters, rotating families, quiet tragedies in good shoes. The judge was efficient and sharper than Ethan wanted her to be. He went first. Of course he did. Dana argued continuity, operating expertise, risk to the firm, the need to protect employees from domestic spillover. She described me as historically non-operational with respect to the business asset. Technically true in the narrowest way. Morally ridiculous in the broader one. Aaron stood and told the story differently. He did not inflate me into something false. He did not call me co-architect or hidden manager or unsung mastermind. He said I was a documented member, guarantor, capital contributor, and party to a controlling addendum with explicit protections against undisclosed encumbrance. He said recent conduct raised concern that business authority was being reframed while material financing activity occurred without notice. He said the court did not need to decide ultimate allocation that day, only to prevent unilateral damage while the truth was sorted. Then he handed up the side agreement. I watched Ethan's face from across the room. Not a huge reaction. That would have required losing control publicly. But something changed. Tiny. His focus shifted. His jaw went still in a way I recognized from years of watching him calculate risk behind his eyes. He had forgotten the clause. Or more accurately, he had forgotten that I had not. The judge ordered mutual restraints on further encumbrance, transfer, or modification of the building asset absent written agreement or court authorization. She denied Ethan exclusive control pending fuller disclosure. She set a discovery schedule. She reminded both parties that incomplete or misleading financial conduct in dissolution cases had a short shelf life. We stepped into the hallway afterward, and Ethan followed me past the elevators. You blindsided me, he said. I turned slowly. Did I? You had no right to spring old language like that in a temporary hearing. Old language in a current contract is usually called current. You know exactly what I mean. Yes, I said. I usually do. He lowered his voice. If you make this a public circus, everyone loses. That sentence stayed with me because it contained his religion in one line. Not because it was false, because who counted as everyone in Ethan's mind had always excluded me until consequences threatened him too. I'm not making anything public, I said. I'm reading. He stared at me for a long second, then smiled without warmth. Careful, Julia. You may find out the business isn't worth what you think. I let him walk away, believing that landed. At the halfway point of a war, the mind starts inventing endings to make the waiting bearable. Mine invented 3. In one, Ethan backed down quietly, and we settled with the building sold. In another, the judge split everything cleanly, and we each limped away poorer. In the darkest one, Ethan's missing paperwork turned out to be messy but survivable. Enough to embarrass him, not enough to break his leverage. And I spent years recovering from a fight that proved only that I had finally shouted in the right direction. Reality, as usual, chose a sharper route. Discovery did what discovery does. It made lies tired, Subpoenas to lenders surfaced draft term sheets Ethan had requested, using projected rent rolls and capital improvement schedules I had never seen. One included a borrower certification referencing managerial discretion consistent with governing authority. Another attached an organizational chart that reduced my role to historical guarantor, with no present consent rights identified. Convenient, selective, dangerous. Then came the email chain. I will never forget the moment Aaron sent it. Subject line, read page 14 first. I opened the PDF at my desk after everyone else had gone home. The nonprofit office was dark except for my lamp. Outside, the street glowed wet gold under traffic lights. I scrolled to page 14, and there it was. From Ethan Mercer to Sloan Barrett, and a lender rep. If we need to clean up vestigial consent issues, I can handle that internally. My wife is focused on keeping the house and won't have the appetite for a commercial dispute. Vestigial consent issues. I read the sentence again, then the next line. Worst case, I file and let temporary orders establish operational status before she catches up. Before she catches up. Not if. Before. The room went very still around me. This wasn't marital selfishness anymore, not even just concealment. It was premeditated sequencing, a plan to use filing posture to outrun consent rights. Aaron called 5 minutes later. You read it. Yes. You all right? No, I said honestly, but I'm clear. Good. Because we're close to the part where clarity matters more than comfort. The next week brought the twist. Not in court, not first. At the title company, a senior underwriting counsel, after reviewing the addendum and lender submissions, issued a written position that any attempted encumbrance or beneficial transfer without my written consent could create an uninsurable defect and expose parties to claims for misrepresentation if prior statements omitted the side agreement's control provisions. The lender, suddenly less brave, froze the facility. Barrett Commercial Realty withdrew its package from circulation. And because Ethan had already incurred consultant costs, valuation fees, legal spend, and commitment preparation expenses, all based on a financing path he could no longer lawfully complete. The entire elegant machine seized mid-spin. That alone would have hurt him. Well, but the real twist was worse. Buried in one lender response was an attachment Ethan had not intended us to see. An unsigned draft letter of intent from a private capital group proposing not just a line of credit, but a structured equity infusion tied to redevelopment rights if the building were transferred into a new SPE within 12 months. Special purpose entity, new shell, new chain, new story. And on the draft organizational page for that proposed SPE, under anticipated controlling member, appeared the name Barrett Mercer Urban Partners. Barrett Mercer. His name and hers. Not hypothetical romance. Planned business. Not a midlife mistake. A replacement structure. I sat in Aaron's office holding those pages and felt my body move through stages too fast to name. Shock, heat, numbness, then something colder than all three. He was building the next life before ending this one, I said. Aaron folded his hands. Looks that way. With her? Yes. Using the building? Yes. And he thought he could run that through while I refinanced the house and said thank you for the privilege of keeping the furniture. Aaron didn't answer because he didn't have to. I looked down again at the page where Barrett Mercer Urban Partners sat in clean black type, like a future invitation. Suddenly, everything made sense. The speed, the contempt, the pressure to take the house, the insistence that the business was burden rather than prize. He wasn't trying to preserve the building. He was trying to peel it free of me before repackaging it into the next chapter of his self-myth. That was when I told Aaron to invoke the clause. Fully. No more waiting. No more letting him believe this was just a divorce with sharp edges. That afternoon, Aaron sent formal notice of breach under Section 4, B, of the addendum. He laid out the undisclosed financing activity, the attempted beneficial control changes, the material omissions, the lender freeze, the title implications, and my election of remedy. Assumption of controlling interest at book value. That phrase mattered because book value, on paper, was far lower than market value. Ethan had spent years taking depreciation, reporting constrained cash positions, and minimizing upside whenever it benefited financing or tax posture. Now the same bookkeeping posture boxed him in. If the clause held, if the court accepted the breach logic, I could assume majority control of Mercer Design Holdings at a price structure reflecting the numbers he himself had used to reduce apparent value. He had been discounting the asset for years. Now the discount had teeth. Aaron also demanded reimbursement of fees and notice of preservation to all counterparties involved. The letter was devastating in the way the best legal letters are. Not emotional, simply inevitable. Ethan called me within 20 minutes. I didn't answer. He called again. Then came the text. What the hell did you do? I looked at the screen for a long time before replying. I read the clause. His response came fast. This is abuse of process. No, I wrote back. This is consequences of process. He showed up at the house that night without warning. I saw his headlights cut across the front windows, hard and bright. Then his knock. Not a polite one. A claim disguised as woodwork. I opened the door but kept the chain on. He stood on the porch in the cold, coat open, anger making him look suddenly older. Really older. Not dignified. Just frayed. You are not taking my building, he said. Our building? I corrected. You don't know what you're doing. That sentence is getting stale. This is a pressure tactic. It won't hold. Then you should be calm. His mouth tightened. Aaron Feld put you up to this. No. Marlene Chow protected me from it 7 years ago. Aaron just reads faster than you expected. At Marlene's name, something flickered. Memory. Regret. Calculation. Maybe all three. Julia, he said, shifting tone now, trying on reason. You don't actually want to run a commercial property. I almost smiled. There it was. Still. Even now. This isn't about what I want to run, I said. It's about what you tried to hide. He exhaled through his nose like he was containing himself for my benefit. The SPE was exploratory. With your girlfriend's name in it. He looked away for half a second. Enough. That's not relevant. It became relevant when you tried to finance it past me. He stepped closer. The chain held. You will destroy value out of spite. No, I said softly. You discounted it out of habit. That landed. I saw it, for the first time since this began. Truly the first time. Ethan looked at me like I was not a wife in distress, not a sentimental obstacle, not a temporary audience. He looked at me like a counterparty. And because men like Ethan build identity out of asymmetry, that hurt him more than anger ever could. The weeks that followed were brutal. He fought everything, challenged the clause, challenged materiality, claimed no consummated transfer occurred, claimed exploratory financing is not encumbrance, claimed the side agreement required actual, completed breach, not attempted control shift. Dana filed memoranda thick with language about commercial practicality and disproportionate remedy. Aaron answered with the emails, the title freeze, the lender certifications, the organizational chart, the timing, the bank access changes, the divorce filing sequence, the carefully partial disclosures, the proposed SPE, the hidden strategy to establish temporary operating status before she catches up. Before she catches up became the most expensive phrase Ethan ever wrote. Settlement talks opened and crashed twice. He offered me more cash for the house buyout if I walked away from the building claim. No. He offered to sell the building and split net proceeds if we each released fee claims. No. He offered a structured payout over 3 years if I stopped pursuing control. No. By then it wasn't vengeance. That's what people say when a woman continues past the point where they expected fatigue to domesticate her. But vengeance is heat. This was colder, cleaner. I wanted the paper to say what happened. I wanted the record to reflect that he had not merely cheated on me or lied in the marriage or positioned himself aggressively in divorce. I wanted it to show that he attempted to reroute an asset through omission and timing, and that the protections I insisted on years earlier were not decorative paranoia, but the difference between erasure and survival. The evidentiary hearing took place in late May. I remember the weather because Seattle finally gave us one of those bright blue mornings that make betrayal feel almost theatrical. The courtroom felt smaller than before, tighter, less procedural, more personal, because the documents had by then acquired narrative force. Ethan testified first. He was good. Of course he was good. Calm, articulate, regretful in the correct places. He said the financing discussions were preliminary. He said he never intended to close anything without eventual legal alignment. He said the SPE concept was only a brainstorming exercise. He said the side agreement language was outdated and never practically invoked during the life of the business. He said my current position was driven by hurt over the marriage rather than good faith concern over governance. Dana guided him beautifully. If I hadn't known him, really known him, I might have admired it. Then Aaron cross-examined. He walked Ethan through the bank access change, the lender certification, the omission of my consent rights in the organizational material, the email referencing temporary orders before I caught up, the Barrett Mercer Urban Partners draft, the absence of any written notice to me, the lack of any contemporaneous message saying, "Julia, I'm considering financing that may affect the building. Let's discuss." Piece by piece, the Polish thinned, not all at once. That's not how these things happen. No Perry Mason explosion, just attrition. 100 precise cuts between the story he wanted and the documents he authored. At one point, Aaron asked, "When you wrote vestigial consent issues, were you referring to your wife's documented rights under the addendum?" Dana objected. The judge overruled. Ethan paused too long. I was referring to legacy governance complexities. "Your wife's rights," Aaron said. I was speaking informally. In an email to a lender and your business partner. Sloan is not my business partner. Aaron lifted the draft LOI. Not for lack of trying. There was a murmur then, tiny, human. The kind courts try to suppress and never fully can. I testified after lunch. I expected to shake. I didn't. Aaron asked me about the inheritance from my mother, the guarantee, Marlene's advice, the clause, the bank email, the way Ethan framed separation before filing, the proposed settlement that steered me toward the house while he preserved the building, the email chain, the draft SPE, the reason I waited before invoking the remedy. Why didn't you tell him about the clause immediately Aaron asked. The courtroom went quiet in that particular way it does when a question finally reaches the heart of the story. Because that was the title, wasn't it? I didn't tell him about the clause. I looked at Ethan then, truly looked at him. He held my gaze for a second and then, just barely, looked past me. Because he had spent years assuming he was the only person in the marriage who understood paper, I said. And once I realized he was moving in the dark on purpose, I understood that warning him would only help him hide it better. Aaron said nothing. He didn't need to. Dana cross-examined me on business involvement, suggesting I was now inflating my understanding because divorce made me angry. I answered carefully, no performance, no overreach. I said I was never the day-to-day operator. I said that was not the same as being irrelevant. I said I knew what I had signed, what I had contributed, and what notice I did not receive. I said hurt and comprehension can occupy the same body at the same time. The judge took the matter under advisement. 14 more days. Some wars are loud in the middle and silent at the end. Those 14 days were the loudest part in my head. I barely slept. I worked. I answered donor emails. I attended a school art showcase and smiled at parents, while children in painted cardboard crowns performed a scene from A Midsummer Night's Dream under cafeteria lights. I folded laundry. I paid the water bill. I lived in the suspended ordinary. Ethan stopped trying to charm me and started trying to frighten me. One email warned that if I forced control transfer, I could inherit tenant issues, deferred maintenance, and exposure I wasn't prepared to manage. Another mentioned reputational fallout in the design community. Then a call from Dana's office suggesting settlement remained my best chance to avoid protracted commercial litigation with uncertain downstream consequences. That one almost made me laugh. Uncertain downstream consequences had been Ethan's operating model for months. Then, the order came. I was in my office when Aaron called. Are you sitting? Yes. Good, because you're about to enjoy the most expensive reading lesson of Ethan Mercer's life. My heart slammed once against my ribs. The court found the side agreement enforceable, he said. Found that his undisclosed financing conduct and beneficial control efforts, taken together, triggered breach under the addendum. Found his omission and sequencing strategy credible evidence of intentional circumvention. Your election of remedy stands, subject to accounting. I closed my eyes. For a second I couldn't speak. Aaron kept going, voice steady. You get assumption of controlling interest at book value, less offset calculations to be finalized. He's on the hook for a significant portion of fees. The court also cited his selective disclosures negatively for overall credibility in the dissolution matter. The room blurred, not dramatically, just softly, like the whole world had exhaled 1 degree. And Ethan? I asked. Aaron let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Ethan is about to discover what it feels like when paperwork has a memory. After the call, I went into the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and cried without sound. Not because I had won a building, not because he had lost one, because for the first time in years, maybe in the whole marriage, the official record had not mistaken his confidence for truth. The accounting phase was ugly, technical, and deeply satisfying. Book value calculations exposed every year. Ethan had preferred conservative internal valuations when it saved tax burden or served financing posture. We brought in a receiver-adjacent accountant to supervise the transition. Tenant estoppels were reviewed, capital accounts adjusted, fees piled onto his side like bricks. He kept fighting around the edges, but the center had broken. By August, I held controlling interest in Mercer Design Holdings. By September, I replaced Ethan as managing member. By October, Barrett Mercer Urban Partners existed nowhere but in abandoned drafts and one catastrophic chain of discovery exhibits. Sloane vanished from the story, the way people like her always do when the future they attach themselves to turns out to be underwritten by lies. The power reversal didn't happen in one cinematic moment. Real reversals rarely do. It happened in a sequence. The property manager began calling me first. The lender required my signature, not Ethan's, on any communication touching the building. A tenant improvement dispute came in, and I handled it with a level of boring competence that would have offended Ethan more than open triumph. Then came the mediation on final dissolution terms. Same hallway energy, same polished shoes, same institutional coffee. Only this time, Ethan sat across from me without the shield he had built around the building, and the rest of the marital estate suddenly looked like what it had always been: negotiable. He no longer had the appreciating commercial asset, the leverage source, or the hidden next act structure. He had earnings, yes, status, sort of, but no secret runway. Dana was still skilled, but the tone had changed. Less inevitability, more arithmetic. The house sold, retirement split, personal accounts traced and divided, fee issues narrowed. At one point during a break, Ethan caught me alone near the vending machines. No anger this time. That was gone. Just a tiredness I had never seen on him before. Real tiredness. The kind not even vanity can iron flat. "You could have told me," he said quietly. I looked at him for a moment, almost not understanding. "Told you what?" "About the clause. Before all this." The sentence hung there between us like something absurd and sincere at once, and that was the final revelation, maybe the only one that mattered. Even now, even after the order, the fees, the humiliation, the loss, some part of him still believed my role had been to protect him from the full consequences of his own conduct, to warn him, to soften the edge, to remain somehow the manager of his avoidable pain. I said, "You mean I could have helped you hide it better?" He shook his head. "That's not what I'm saying." "It is." His face hardened. "You wanted to punish me." "No," I said. "I wanted the truth to arrive before you rearranged it." He looked away. For the first time, I think, there was no version of me in his mind he could use. Not wife, not obstacle, not audience, not emotional woman. Just witness. "I loved you," he said. Maybe he believed that. Maybe he loved me in the way some men love a foundation, intensely, right up until they want to build over it and stop wanting it visible. "I know," I said. "You just loved control more." The final documents were signed 6 weeks later. I kept the building. Not forever, as it turned out. Another thing life teaches: victory isn't always possession. Sometimes it's authorship. For a year, I managed it carefully, stabilized leases, repaired deferred issues Ethan had pushed off, and improved the books. Then I sold it, transparently, profitably, on terms no one had to hide from anyone. The proceeds seeded a smaller commercial portfolio, held in a structure with governance so clear, even arrogance would get bored reading it. I stayed in Seattle, moved to a townhouse with more light and less memory, kept working at the nonprofit until I decided finally that I was tired of raising money for other people's visions while apologizing for wanting my own. 2 years later, I launched an advisory firm, helping women review property documents, guarantees, side letters, operating agreements, All the quiet paper people sign because love, urgency, or trust made discussion feel impolite. It turns out there is an entire population of smart women walking around with signatures under obligations nobody ever fully explained to them. Because someone assumed they wouldn't ask the second question. I teach the second question now, sometimes the third. And whenever a client lowers her voice and says, "I don't know if this is even important," I tell her the same thing Marlene told me in a different form. Boring language is where the trap usually lives. The day Ethan saw the sold notice on the building, the real sold notice, public and clean, he sent one last email, no subject line, just 7 words. "You made all of this unnecessary. I read it once and archived it without reply." Because unnecessary was never the right word. Necessary was the clause. Necessary was the copy in the cloud. Necessary was the old lawyer who knew charm ages badly under fluorescent light. Necessary was the bank email at 6:12 in the morning. Necessary was every time he said I didn't understand, because eventually those words forced me to understand everything. People like Ethan always think the decisive moment is the hearing, or the order, or the dollar amount. It isn't. The decisive moment comes much earlier. It comes when you discover the paper was trying to protect you, and you decide not to betray yourself by looking away. That was the moment. Not when I won, not when he lost. When I realized he was counting on my silence to stay gentler than his ambition, and I let the documents speak instead. So no, I didn't tell him about the clause. I let him walk straight into the shape of his own intent. I let him explain himself in emails. I let him build the trap using words like streamlined and efficient and eventual alignment. I let him believe timing could outrun memory. And when the truth finally arrived, cold, stamped, itemized, it did not sound like revenge. It sounded like paper being read aloud in a room where confidence no longer outranked fact. That was enough. More than enough. Because in the end, the thing he underestimated wasn't my anger, or even my patience. It was my ability to stay quiet long enough to see the whole board, and then choose the move he thought I would never understand. He told me I'd regret fighting him. He was wrong. What I regret is how long I mistook being trusted with the burden for being trusted with the truth. What I regret is every year I let competence wear the costume of support instead of ownership. But fighting him? No. I don't regret that at all. I regret only that I ever believed the woman asking where the paper went was the dangerous one. Because the truth is simpler than that. The dangerous one is always the person who thinks the other signer won't read to the bottom of the page. And he should have known better. My name was there too.